Absolutely buzzing to have Henry Schuck, the CEO and founder of ZoomInfo, on this podcast. My name's James Ski. I'm the CEO and founder of Sales Confidence. We are building the world's most valuable B2B sales community, and we help salespeople each stage of their career with their mindset, well-being, and performance. And the purpose of this podcast is really to access the minds of the most inspiring sales and founder-led leaders on the planet. And I have to be honest, Henry ticks all of those boxes and more on being an individual that's built a global business into the $1 billion of valuation, and also just adding huge amounts of value to go-to-market teams around the world. So I'm really excited to have you on board, Henry. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, James. I'm excited to be here.
Well, that's really good. Well, let's go straight into it. Because you're starting your day, I'm halfway through mine. So what are you most excited about for your day ahead?
Yeah, so I think like every day, my day is filled with different things on it. I have this podcast interview with you today. I have an in-person investor interview later. I have internal one-on-ones. I have a monthly operating review with one of the teams on the company. I think what's really unique about my job is that I can be in a legal meeting at 1, in a sales meeting at 1:30, a marketing meeting at 2, an investor meeting at 2:30, a demo for a large enterprise client at 3. And so there's a ton of variety in my day. And over time, through different variations of the business, that variety has changed. And so I'm constantly being challenged to learn something new and be good at a different set of operating criteria. Sometimes that's, hey, you're not good enough telling the vision to investors, or you're not good enough talking to enterprise clients, or you have to change the way you run operating reviews because the way we've done it in the past is not as good. So there's this constant evolution in the type of meetings, and then the type of leader I have to be in those meetings. So, lots of challenge, lots of variation.
Yeah, I love that. So you've got a lot of variety ahead of you, which keeps it interesting, I'm guessing. I just want to pick up on a point because I've heard this. I've met a lot of ZoomInfo employees and your team members, and a lot of them still say you still love getting stuck into deals and demos. I just want to know why. You could be nicely protected. Why do you still bother getting stuck in like that?
Honestly, I learned the very, very most about our business, our products, our customer base when I'm sitting in front of a customer. And when you're asking a customer, and there's like I'll tell you, last week, I had 2 meetings jump to my head. The first one was a meeting with a really large enterprise client. And they're a large enterprise client. They're not a large enterprise client with us. So there's a large opportunity there. And I had a meeting with the chief revenue officer, and I've done a number of these large enterprise client meetings now. So I'm starting to get a feel for what's expected of me and what works in those meetings. Because for 9 months, I was I think of it as a baby deer when they're trying to walk and they keep trying to get up and they just keep falling, and they keep trying to get up and they just keep falling. And I went to meeting after meeting after meeting, and I was trying this pitch and this messaging and that messaging. And none of that messaging really worked. And I've just sort of gotten into a place where I know how to be myself in those meetings, what things matter to chief revenue officers of large companies, how to have that conversation. And so I had that meeting, and the thing that I walked away with is chief revenue officers, they just want to hear what best practice go-to-market looks like in large enterprise clients. And we have this great opportunity where if you go read any of what the analyst reports say about ZoomInfo, the one thing they say over and over and over and over again is we run the most efficient go-to-market motion in software. And so I'm going to show up, I'm going to leverage that and go hey, I don't know if you've read this about us, but we run this incredibly efficient go-to-market motion. And let me just show up and show you how we do it. I'll take you from the beginning to the end. I'll show you how we use data and technology and intent data and do buyer propensity modeling. And I'll show you the whole thing. I won't even bring salespeople. I'll just bring internal practitioners to show you. And they say yes 100% of the time to that. And then they go get me a really great audience to do that with. So now I've got this motion a little bit down. And then the second meeting with the customer, I did an in-person meeting in Chicago with one of our staffing and recruiting customers. And the thing that I walk away from there, just bright lights, is, hey, ZoomInfo does a lot. It's so much more than just a contact data provider. We provide intent data and website identification data and marketing attribution data, and we can connect you into the display ad networks, all this stuff. But people don't know those things about us. They kind of still know us as the contact company data provider. And so I walk away from that meeting going like, man, that's a big solvable problem in our business. And I've got to go make sure that we are properly thinking through exactly how to solve that. But I can think of those problems in the abstract. But when I'm sitting in front of a customer, the knowledge you gain from that interaction, it just drives a tremendous amount of clarity in what your strategy in the business needs to be.
I love that. I love that. And I think there's some huge takeaways for any other founders that are going to be listening to this. So thank you for that input and advice. Thinking about your journey, because, you founded, what was Discover Org when you were in college. So you've been on a journey for a long time. But where did that original motivation come from? Like, where did the inspiration and motivation come from to actually create something from scratch?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question because I worked at a similar company when I was in college to ZoomInfo and to Discover Org. We ended up acquiring that business in 2015. But while I worked there, the thing that jumped out at me was the company wasn't really being run like a good business. It was like kind of a lifestyle business. There was a CEO and then me and then a couple college kids. And it had grown tremendously. So there was tons of demand for what we were offering, which is like you can think of it as the precursor to ZoomInfo. And so lots of demand, not a lot of business infrastructure, weren't investing in the product. We weren't investing in marketing or sales or infrastructure. And I kept kind of begging the owner to do that. Hey, why don't we build a business here? Why don't we hire salespeople? And he wasn't really interested in building a business. So when I left and I went to law school, I said, well, one thing I know for sure is I can run that business better. I can do something similar, but run a great business on top of it. And I think that creates a ton of value. And so that was the motivation. Like, could I run a better business in a space that I knew had a large total addressable market, that I knew the economics were strong, I knew customers were willing to pay, I knew there was great product market fit, and I knew that the one competitor in the space was just not investing in the business operations of the company. And it was like, well, I can build a better product. I can run a better business. Let me go prove that I can do that. And so we got into the space.
Amazing. And if you think of those transitions, your business has continued to evolve and grown. You've listed now, you're going through another evolution. Like all of these stages, how have you kept up leveling yourself and adapting? You could have been lost along the way. So how have you up leveled yourself and kept pace with the growth of the business that you've created?
Yeah, look, I think everything happens in kind of 3-year phases. And so if I think of the first 3 years, we were just very much in like a bootstrap startup phase. It was really about just kind of understanding what resonated with your customer, how you built sort of repetitive, redundant structures in your business. So, hey, I was doing all of sales and I was doing all of marketing and I was doing all of messaging and website and Google ads. And so over time, how do you start? The first 3 years is what are those things that are most important in your business? And then how do you start giving them away to other people and training other people to be able to do them? The next 3 years were about scale for our business. So this would have been like, we've been at this for 16 years, going on 17. So the next 3 years were really about scale. How do you take those things that you identified that you needed to scale, some that maybe you had just started to scale, and actually scale them in the business? And so that was the next 3 years. And the next 3 years after that, we got some outside funding. And so it was like, how do you start building the groundwork for a really valuable enterprise? You have a board of directors and you're bringing on a CFO and you're figuring out the rhythm in the business. And how are you figuring out equity for your team? And so the next 3 years where you could think of them more like institutional growth. And the next 3 years after that for us was really about scale. How do you take all these things that got you through the first big phase of your journey and then operate at scale around them? And so each one of them have unique learnings. I would say, one of the questions that we talked about was like, what book, what were the most important books that you've read? And I've never answered this question this way, but when I think about that, it's really like, it's by phase. So like in the early days, the best book I read was The E-Myth. That first 3 years, there's a book called The E-Myth that's really just designed to help early stage founders figure out how to duplicate themselves. That was like a really like a eye-opening book for me. It gave me a roadmap to how to continue to run this small business. The next 3 years, I read The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Like that was this really powerful book that said like, hey, if you're building a technology company, like you're probably dealing with all of these issues, and these issues probably where you sit right now feel really unique and you might be embarrassed by them. But in reality, we all dealt with them. And some of the best entrepreneurs dealt with the same exact issue you're dealing with right now. And so it gave you some validation and confidence that you're doing the right things. You just got to keep doing them. Then we're like kind of a middle-sized company. I read this book called The Messy Middle. That was a really good book for that stage. Today, I'm reading a book called The Zone to Win by Jeffrey Moore, which is a really valuable book for the stage that we're in right now, where we have we're a leader in our market space, but we're introducing new disruptive products to the market. And how do you make sure that those disruptive products don't get lost in the mix? And what kind of focus do you need to get through there? And then I would layer on top of that, sort of the last couple of years, I read this book called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker, which is just like a good book about like the things you need to do to make sure your mind is right through all of your journey. So it depends on where you are in your journey, which books like resonate the most. But I know, like I pick up a book, I read the first like couple chapters and I'm like, yeah, not for me right now. But then I pick up another book and I'm like, oh my God, every page is resonating with me. And I'm going to read every page in this book because it's, it has direct impact on and connection with what I'm dealing with in the business right now.
I love that philosophy. That is probably the best articulation of when to read a book I've ever heard.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. It
Yeah,
is all
okay,
about
great.
the phases. And I think about, when I hear about sales leaders or salespeople transitioning to leadership, they're also going through these different phases and they need different elements and different support, different guidance at different stage. And therefore, you can get some from books. And thanks for being on top of the question. So let's just go back a little bit. You've already told us a little bit about ZoomInfo, but if I've got a CRO listening to this conversation or a CMO, explain what is ZoomInfo and what is the broader offering, so they're clear what they can get from engaging with your business.
Yeah, so let me start at like what you probably know us by already, and then what we built on top of that. So if you know ZoomInfo, you probably know us as really high quality data on companies and really high quality data on the people who work at those companies. And so we cover over 100 million companies, over 260 million business professionals at those companies. The business professionals, everything, from the CEO down to an individual contributor. The companies, everything from the largest companies in the world to small mom and pop dry cleaners down the street that don't even have a website, and everything in between. And then contact information on the buyer. So how do I email them? How do I call them with their mobile phone? How do I engage with that buyer? So that's the like fundamental level of data at the foundational level of the company. Around that, we've built a number of key insights about those companies when they're in market for products and services, when they're researching cybersecurity or collaboration or compliance or whatever it is. When are they actually in market to buy products or services? We give you intent signals that tell you across that universe who's in market for products and services. And then we light up who's visiting your website. Today, of 100 visitors to your website today, 2 are going to identify themselves and fill out a form. The other 98, poof, into the thin air. You have no idea who they are. You can't follow up on them. You can't tell a sales rep to call them. We light up that area of website visitors, and through technology and data that we've built, tell you who the people visiting your website are, who the companies visiting your website are. And so now you've got this tremendous amount of data. You've got signal on top of the data that tells you when to engage with a key buyer, We built technology on top of that to actually orchestrate that motion. So instead of telling a sales rep, hey, log into ZoomInfo every day, go look at who visited our website, go look at who's spiking on intent, what we've built is this orchestration layer called workflows that let you run that play over and over and over again. So you can say, hey, anytime a company hires a new chief information officer, capture for me all the VPs of IT, send it to a sales rep, start a campaign, do display ads against it, do social media marketing against it, put it into this email campaign. Anytime a company spikes on intent for our products and services or is researching one of our competitors, run this play. So you're leveraging that company and contact data on that signal data with software to orchestrate the motion. So it's all about running really efficient go-to-market plays, and it extends from sales to marketing to talent acquisition today. But when you bring the marketing OS features together with the sales OS features, that's when things become really powerful. So marketing can say, hey, here are all the signals we're going to look at and the campaigns we're going to run, and we can communicate directly with sales and their platform about what we're running. We think that's the future of go-to-market.
Amazing. I can sense the enthusiasm to empower people with that understanding of the breadth and depth of what you have to offer. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that understanding happen in the UK and Europe. So I'm glad that that you've got that drumbeat. You talk like you obviously have hired hundreds and hundreds of salespeople on your journey. Um, what are like the attributes that you look for or you believe you see in top performing salespeople?
Yeah, so on this one, James, I would tell you a little bit of this is phasing too. Like if you're a really early stage company in a really new space, the salesperson you're looking for is something different than when you're like the established leader in the market. Now, that doesn't mean that the qualities that made you successful when you were in a small when you were sort of a small evangelistic company are not going to carry through. It just means that maybe they're like you don't need as many of these key qualities later on that you needed early on. I'll give you an example. I remember I hired a salesperson who would be great today early on. And I sat her at the computer. This was way back in the day. So it was like we were using GoToMeeting. And I said, here's what you do when you do a customer call. You sign on, you pull up GoToMeeting, you start recording. You pull up GoToMeeting, they sign on, you walk them through this deck. And it was like 2 days from when I told her that. And I went to her office and she wasn't using GoToMeeting. She was just making phone calls. And I was like, what are you doing? I told you have to do GoToMeeting. And she was like, well, no one's trained me on how to do GoToMeeting. There's no manual on how to do GoToMeeting. There's been no training system on how to use GoToMeeting. And I was like, what are you talking about? You want me to Google how to use GoToMeeting and then like come back to you and show you the Google answer for how to GoToMeeting, how to use GoToMeeting? Like that's crazy. Just Google it and then figure out how to use it. And like in that moment, I just realized like if your last job was at State Farm or some big company, and then you come to this startup, when you showed up at State Farm, they trained you on everything you needed to do. You knew exactly what to do. You probably had 2 weeks of just like training. You sat down and it was just like repeating the stuff you did in training. And in a startup, there is none of that. It's just like, here's what you need to do. Go figure it out. And then let's talk about it in a week and see if there are iterations we can make against it. When you're a bigger company, you build enablement and training and it's regimented. And so no one's going to show up and say like, hey, that thing you asked me to do? I have no idea how to do it because we've thought about how that shows up in training and enablement and everything. So I would say early on, you need self-starters. You need people who are super curious, who like to solve problems on their own, that don't need a lot of guidance, who are super coachable. Coachability moves throughout. Later on, you need people who know how to run a process because we're going to show you like, hey, this is how you win. If you show up to a SMB call, this is the play you run. This is the deck you go through. This is the talk track you use. If you get this objection, this is what you say. This is how you follow up. This is what you send on the first day, the second day, the third day. This is how you find value for your clients. And so later on, when you have a process built, you need people who can sit in that chair and run the process. And it turns out, I've had super talented salespeople, like the guy or the girl who just like knows how to schmooze and talk to the buyer and just like they just like they sweat sales to like sales is in their blood. And I've seen those people get regularly beat by people who have no sales talent, like none. They show up and you're like, how are you even carrying a conversation with somebody you don't know? But they sit down and they run the process. They know how to do it. They learn how to do it. They go, okay, I may not have the the ability to build a rapport with somebody right out of the gates, but I'm going to run the motion. I'm going to ask for the follow-up. I'm going to send value after. I'm going to get on the call. I'm going to look to multi-thread. I'm going to ask for the sale. They just know the process and they never deviate. That person always beats the person who has raw talent and is not willing to run the process. And so later on, when you have a really built out process, you want people who can run that play for you and are going to run it consistently. So that's kind of what we look for today.
That makes sense. Thinking about like the thousands, so thinking about the perspective of someone that could come and work at ZoomInfo, you're going to be expanding and continuing to grow across the UK and Europe, right?
Yep.
Why should someone come and work at ZoomInfo? What makes it an attractive place to come and join, and what's in your DNA as a business?
There's so much in that. But look, I think first of all, let's start at the company level. We're in this super underpenetrated market. We have this huge total addressable market that we're single digits penetrated into. If you go look at the way companies are going to market across Europe, across the United States, anywhere, what you'll find is really antiquated motions that have been built up over 100 years, where there are no systems, automation, or data driving their go-to-market motion. And we change that for companies, big and small. We work with just under 50% of the Fortune 500. We work with big companies, small companies, and we change their trajectory with our data and technology. And it's really early, so you have lots of opportunity. The second thing I would tell you is that this is a company that wants success out of every one of the people around it. So if you're someone who's willing to come in, learn the systems, commit, and you love to win, this is a place where you constantly move up the ladder. We compared the promotions of our employees against the benchmark of our peers, and our employees get promoted 2.5 times more often than our software peers. And so if you come in here and you're looking for an opportunity to grow your professional career, we offer you that 2.5 times more than the broader software industry. And so there are all these opportunities that are driven behind big total addressable market really early in the space, and a culture of winning and wanting to win. It comes together to drive, really tremendous upwards trajectory in people's careers. It's just a really great place to work.
Amazing, amazing. So moving on a little bit more personally to like how you've gained your confidence in doing what you do. Also, I'm also a father. I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 boys and a daughter. And I noticed you've got a daughter. I was just wondering, maybe a bit personal to ask, but how you cultivate confidence in your daughter as well as yourself.
Yeah, cool. That's a fun one. So yeah, I have a 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old. I think the biggest thing that I've done with Grace is taught her that that in order to be great at something, you have to practice. That you're not just gifted with like something with great ability, but that you have to hone that and practice and get better every day. There's this moment that I talk about. We're in a car ride, and she has a friend that's 4 years older than her and is on all these club soccer teams, has been playing soccer for like 6 years. She practices like 4 times a week, has a game once a week. And we're driving, and my daughter goes, I'm just as good at soccer as Colby is. And up to that point in her life, she's 6 at this point. Up to that point, everything has been about like you're the best swimmer, you're the best runner, you have super fast speed, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best. And then so that's great. Like I loved instilling that confidence in her. And then in this moment, I realized like, oh, I got to change the narrative. And so we're in the car and I go like, Grace, that's ridiculous. You're obviously not as good of a soccer player as Colby. You could be, but Colby practices soccer 4 times a week and she goes to games and she's been practicing for 5 years and you don't practice soccer yet. If you did, you would be as good as Colby, probably better, but you've got to practice every day. She started crying in the back seat. My wife is like, hey, maybe take it easy, like maybe ease into that discussion. But she sees it now. The other day I asked her, I go, yesterday actually, I said, hey, um, there was this video on TikTok of a girl playing soccer, and it said, and basically the girl was not great at soccer, she was great at gymnastics. And I showed it to my daughter and I go like, well, what does this remind you of? She's like, yeah, I'm good at gymnastics because I practice all the time, but I don't practice soccer, so I'm not as good at soccer. And it's like, okay, that message is landing. And so she knows now, like, well, if you want to be better, you got to practice. She tells my wife, my wife bought this like embroidery machine, super complicated. And when she got it, I was like, ugh, you're going to have to really learn that thing. It does not look easy to use. My daughter came in and she's like, don't worry, mommy. If you just practice a lot, you do a lot of practice, you can get really good at that. It's like, okay, great. That's like a really important, valuable message. So that's sort of how I've thought about instilling confidence in her. I think for me, confidence just comes, in my opinion, from trying something new and then validating the results of that and then constantly iterating to improve. I was talking about my enterprise calls. Like I was horrendous at those for a long time and it sucked. I just like hated getting on these enterprise calls because I was like, my last call, my messaging didn't resonate. I'm going to change it a little bit here, but I haven't had enough time in between to really nail my message. But I got to get on it and get another rep and another rep and another rep until I'm much better at those. And so I am much better at those. I'm not Mark Benioff on an enterprise sales call. Like I'm sure he just crushes me. And we have like people who came from Salesforce. So I'm constantly asking them like, have you been on a call with Mark, on an enterprise call with Mark? It's like, tell me exactly what he does. Like, I want to know exactly what Mark Benioff does because I think he's just a whiz at those things. And so it's like, how do I get enough reps and ask enough questions to improve at anything that I'm doing today? And that just built my confidence around it.
Super helpful. Cool. So we're coming to the final stages of this conversation, which has been fascinating. And thanks for your transparency and openness. My next question is going to be around health and well-being. And I know you're heading to the gym. So I'm just curious, like, how do you just maintain, a healthy lifestyle yourself so you can perform as an executive and a business leader in your business?
Yeah. So look, this is, really, really individual for people, but I'll tell you for me, every day, I start my day, I wake up around 5:30. I'll start taking calls at 6, and I can take calls from 6 to 8. And then between 8 and 10, I go to the gym. Um, I do a cold plunge lately. I don't know if it's doing anything, but people said it's valuable, so I'm trying it. Uh, but I get some exercise every day, and it's usually like 35 minutes. I'm not trying to kill myself, but it's 35 minutes of some cardio, some weights, just enough to like clear my mind. There's no phone, right? I'm listening to music, so I'm just getting like exercise in for 35 minutes, and then I'm getting in a little bit like a little bit after like 9:30, and I've done kind of 2 hours of work. I've done an hour and a half of exercise, and then I'm in the office. So exercise every day. I do it every day. The hardest part is when you travel. And so like when I'm traveling, I'm trying not to get my meetings in until like 9:30 so that and I'll go late, I'll do a dinner. But if you get me started before 9:30 when I'm on the road, it's really hard to get a workout in. But I'm taking my stuff and When I travel, I work out. I work out every day when I travel too. So even if I have an 8 o'clock day, I'll just drag myself out of bed at 5:45 and get it in. I think exercise is super important. And what happened to me around exercise is I used to work out like once or twice a week, and that would be like great for me. And there was some point in there where I started working out more, and I realized actually like the mental benefit of exercise in the morning. I started noticing like, oh, I feel like a totally different human being on days that I exercise versus days that I don't. I feel like I'm seeing the world through the eyes of somebody else on exercise days versus non-exercise days. And because of that, on days that I'm thinking about skipping exercise, I just remember how I feel, that feeling of like the way you see the world on days you exercise and the way you see the world on days you don't. And that's motivation enough to get in every day. I just don't want the way I feel when I don't exercise. And so I get in some exercise every day, and then I'm home at night early enough to see my daughter, play with her a little bit, and then put her to bed. And so every night I'm seeing her at night, I'm seeing her in the morning. So we get time every day together, and that makes me feel pretty like balanced in my day to day.
That's great. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I'd love to do it in person one day as well.
Same here.
There's so much energy. There's many questions that I wanted to ask, but I'm also mindful of the time. So I just want to come to the end, really, and just, is there any final thoughts or takeaways or anything you'd like to share with the audience as a parting comment?
Yeah, look, one thing I was thinking about in the run up to this interview, James, is about like when you're instilling confidence in your sales team, what you're supposed to do. And I remember on the books thing, one of my favorite sales books, because I read it at the right phase in the company's growth, was this book called The Little Red Book of Sales by a guy named Jeffrey Gitomer. It's just like a little book with a two-page anecdotes about things you're supposed to do to be great at sales. And I read it like, in the second year of ZoomInfo's history. And I felt like, oh my God, I didn't know ask for a follow-up on every call. I didn't know always follow up with value. I didn't know like ask them how a decision gets made at the company. Like I didn't know any of those things. I was just kind of figuring it out as I went. And so it gave me a framework for like what great looked like. And what I realized today is I do these sessions with the team called Hit Your Number with Henry. And it's 30 minutes. I come on, I teach you something about the sales process. And I'm always trying to find new content for those calls. I'm like, okay, like what is the evolution of what we're teaching our employees and what's the next turn of the screw there? And what I've realized is those basics that we were training 15 years ago, 13 years ago, they still apply to the vast majority of our sales team because they're early in their career and they haven't been through the evolution and they don't really know ask for a follow-up on every call and follow up with value and do research on the company doing this and that. And so if you're a sales leader and you're multiple years into your career, you probably feel like, oh, I gotta go make sure that I'm constantly evolving the next iteration of like how we teach and how we message. That is valuable, but don't forget, like most of your team probably doesn't even know the basics. And so like repeating the basics over and over and over and over is just a part of your job. And it's what makes people really successful as they get those foundational elements down. And so even though they might feel foundational or boring to you, to your employee base, to your sales team, those are still probably really new skills. They probably feel the same way they felt the first time you learned them. And so, repetition is just a core part of your job. And if you're trying to instill confidence in your next generation of sellers, that's a really important piece to be instilling.
Fantastic takeaway. Henry, it's been an absolute delight to have you in this conversation. It's been a pleasure to share this time with you. You've been listening to the Sales Confidence Podcast with Henry Schuck, the CEO and founder of ZoomInfo. We'll be getting these out across the wild internet and many channels that you can listen to this. So, Henry, good talking to you.
Great. Thanks, James.